Hi, welcome to SSW TV. I'm Damien Brady and I'm here at the MVP Summit in Redmond with Scott Hanselman. Welcome, Scott.
Hello.
So look, before we start talking about things like ASP.NET vNext and Angular and JavaScript frameworks and things like that, I just wanted to ask you, you do a lot of community work for your blog and your podcasts and presentations and so on. I'm just interested, what kinds of presentations and community engagement do you get the most benefit from the community?
It depends on what benefit looks like, right?
Yeah.
Like if you're like a Microsoft salesperson, which I'm not, they might do something and their benefit would be, oh, I sold a lot of foo today. If you're a Microsoft open source person and they measure you on how many times a repo has been cloned or how much times something's been downloaded, so like what does engagement mean? For example, I might do a blog post and have it go on Reddit and I'll get 500,000 page views. And you might say, yay, but then I get 0 comments. So arguably these are just drive-by views. So I would rather have 100 comments, that would be huge, than 1,000 page views. So I'm pushing back on your question and basically saying it's a lot more complicated because what are you trying to goal? What's your goal? I thought it was really hard to, this is actually a funny story, I thought it was hard to find Visual Studio Express. Right? Have you ever tried to download Visual Studio Express? There's 15 different ways to download it. Yep. So I registered without asking, visualstudioexpress.com, and then redirected it to a blog post with a list to all the ISOs. So if you go to visualstudioexpress.com, it goes to my blog, boom. That was a piece of community engagement, I guess. And then I just got an email a couple of days ago from someone in the Visual Studio team who said that is now the 4th or 5th highest referrer to downloading Visual Studio Express. And if there's a new version coming out, would I please update my blog post? So that's success. You see what I'm saying? But that's not typical. And the one piece of engagement might be a video or a podcast, but it's more than just that. This is something crazy. Write a blog post, set up a random domain, and then I didn't even know if it was going to work. 6 months later, turns out someone in another organization's measuring it, and he's like, "Oh wow, this thing you did in 20 minutes totally messed us up. Can you point it over here?" And I thought that's kind of cool.
So that's all about getting the community more involved in being able to write.
Solving a problem, right? There was a problem. Visual Studio is hard to find. SQL Server is hard to download. Solve that problem. Same kind of thing. Yeah,
great. So on the community engagement kind of side, we've seen a lot of changes with Microsoft in terms of the open source community. So I believe that started with SignalR or something along those lines.
Sorry, before that, right? I mean, if you want to go all the way back to the first crazy thing that we did, which was the non-Microsoft thing to do, would be, I think, shipping jQuery. I mean, let's go really far back. Should they do that? Is that a good idea? That's jQuery, right? And then NuGet. SignalR, if you remember, was David Fowler and Damien Edwards' side gig. They were doing it at night. They now have a team. There's a whole team that builds SignalR now. So their weekend project graduated to a thing. And then there was including Knockout, right? Yep. And now NPM, Bower, Grunt, Gulp, Bootstrap. Yep. It's business as usual.
So, I mean, we've got to the stage where the entire ASP.NET stack is now open sourced as well.
Everything but web forms.
Okay, so this is very non-traditional Microsoft. So how did that come about? How did the bigwigs get convinced that this is a great idea?
I think there's a lot of different things you could point to. You could point to individual people, Mads Christensen, Glenn Block, Phil Hack, Damien Edwards, and on and on and on and on. You could point to Scott Gu getting promoted, right? And he was a GM, then he was a CVP, and now he's an EVP, and now, I don't know, he floats on water. He's a magical guy. He is our executive air cover. So if we do something crazy, do we have air cover? Is he going to back us up if we do this crazy thing? And now that's changed the culture where it's well, why shouldn't it be open source? So it's not a meeting anymore where we go into a meeting, we go, we want to open source this. And some boss is like, you're insane. Now it's well, okay, let's see if we could. Yeah, and it's almost always a matter of timing. Do we have the time to do it? And we are training, I think, we're training the lawyers to think like we do. And we've streamlined processes. Because we still have to do all the same security checks and all the same geopolitical checks and all the same Microsoft things for shipping software exist still. But we have that separation, like Google Chrome, they have Chromium and Chrome, where Chrome is an instance of Chromium, right? We have the same kind of thing.
So do you think this gives more benefit than cost? I mean, traditionally you'd think a company that sells software and sells their platforms, this would be a downside. Is there more benefit than cost, do you think?
Yeah, it's a good question. This is all my opinion, right? I know people think I'm a spokesman or I'm a paid shill or whatever. I'm just a guy who's loud. But I think Microsoft's trying to sell Windows, Office, and Azure. Yep. So in a perfect world, you buy all those things. But if you're on a Mac and you don't use Office, Azure's what we can sell you. So I have no problem with someone downloading some theoretical 25 meg version of ASP.NET, using Sublime Text or Emacs and running it on a Mac and then deploying it to Azure. And then we win, right? Yep.
Oh, it's a great move, I guess, from my point of view. In terms of moves, there's been a lot of talk here at the summit and historically for the last few weeks about ASP.NET vNext. So I think straight up question: what are the biggest things that developers are going to need to change and know about ASP.NET vNext?
I think, well, I would say what, but also why, is composability. Right? Before, .NET Framework was something that you bought into when you said, here it is, cha-dunk, you know what I mean? It's this giant pyramid that's landed and you need to learn it all. Now it is going to be this tiny core CLR that's cloud optimized, memory optimized for the server, and every single piece of it will be swappable. So I don't like this view engine, I'll use that one. I don't like this IOC container, I'll use that one. So composability, it's going to be a kind of a reset. But remember that there's been resets every few years. True. I mean, I taught classic ASP at Intel in 1995. That's almost 20 years ago. Is it? Yeah. Yeah, dude, think about that. And I spent 40 hours training them on request response server, session, and application. That took 40 hours to teach them that, right? The concept count has increased. So that was a moment where MFC C++ developers had to learn the web, and then I did it again when I trained them on web forms, and then again when I trained the web forms people on MVC. So I just think this is the next big thing, but I don't think it's any more dramatic than anything else. But as Damien Edwards says, we have concept compatibility. Yeah. So controllers are still there and views are still there, so I think everybody needs to just relax.
Relax and just learn the new syntax.
Just let it flow over you. Yep. I mean, we can freak out because things aren't binary compatible, but you know this stuff. You've been writing software, you get it. Yep.
So just to shift a little bit into the JavaScript frameworks, I think more broadly there's a sense, at least with the developers that I speak to, that Angular has won and you should always use Angular and things like that. That kind of thinking, particularly with 2 coming out and some controversial changes. Do you think that's something that developers need to avoid, that kind of we should always use this framework, we should always use this technique?
See, there's always going to be a world champion, right? There was a time when Mike Tyson was the guy, right? And now he's not. But he was at the time, so if you picked Mike Tyson as your guy, he was a safe choice. And then that stuff happened and he wasn't a safe choice. There was a time when jQuery won. That was it, and that was a safe choice. Now jQuery, is changing their goal and their priorities. So maybe jQuery isn't needed. A lot of people are saying Vanilla.js won. So is Angular the winner today? Absolutely. Should you bet on it today? Depends on what you're betting on. Some people like Ember. You might find yourself in a VHS versus Betamax situation. Betamax remains the superior technology, but VHS won. I don't know yet if Angular is Betamax or VHS.
Oh, thank you very much for your time. Hopefully you'll enjoy more of the summit like I will. It's the first one, so... I'm
not the attendee. I am the one that has to make sure that we don't run out of pizza.
Perfect. Excellent. Oh, well, thank you very much for your time, and I'll speak to you later. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you next time on SSW TV.
Did you get all that? We'll take the SSW TV quiz and test your knowledge now.